Welcome to Let's Be Heard, where we're having unfiltered real talks about women's health. I was so sick of feeling like women's health was a dirty topic and a stranger in my own body. So why not create a space for women to discover, relate, learn, and feel empowered? So that's what I do. I break down barriers, share stories, and create the health dialogue we wish we had growing up. I'm your host, Maddie Holman, a women's health advocate and also a VC investor. Disclaimer though, this podcast is intended to be information only. That means this is not a source of medical advice. We aim to share stories, awareness, and resources available, but for any medical advice, seek out your provider. Hi, Kaitlin. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on.
Hey there, Maddie. I'm so excited to be here.
I usually like to start off every episode really going into your personal why and what really led you to start Gabbi. I know you've mentioned to me before, specifically around your experience with breast cancer, so would love to just hear where you started and now where you're at with Gabbi.
You bet. So Gabbi was started because of my mom. I never thought I would go into healthcare. In fact, funny story, was in college and pre-med initially, and I couldn't pass organic chemistry. And my parents took me aside and were like, honey, you have a lot of strengths, but math and science are clearly not one of them. Maybe you should major in something where you have a strength. And so I was never supposed to go into healthcare, but everything changed when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. I was actually in my senior year of college. And what was unique about her diagnosis was that she had just had her annual mammogram and it was clear, no evidence of disease. Long story short, that wasn't correct. She was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer in every organ. And from that diagnosis was gone 7.5 months later. And so for me, not knowing anything about healthcare, being really young, I just couldn't wrap my mind around how, we're always told you get mammograms, that's how we find breast cancer. How could you have a clear mammogram and then be diagnosed with cancer that kills you? I just couldn't comprehend that. So I really dug into her medical record and I discovered two things. First, that she had a really strong family history of cancer, that her OBGYN and primary care doctor never flagged, never talked to her about it, didn't discuss the implications, never recommended genetic testing. That was the first thing that I learned. Turns out she had an undiagnosed BRCA mutation, which basically means she has the highest possible risk, not only of breast cancer, but of ovarian cancer, an increased risk of melanoma, not to mention this mutation that passes down to your children. The second thing that I discovered was that she also had extremely dense breast tissue. And why that matters is because if you have dense breast tissue, especially extremely dense breast tissue, a mammogram is not the right screening. It will not be able to detect breast cancer. So here she was doing what she thought she was supposed to be doing. All the while, cancer was growing and the mammogram wasn't finding it because it was the wrong type of screening. So of course, then I go, well, what does this mean for me? And I ended up finding lumps in both of my breasts and was diagnosed with breast cancer at 24, a year and a half after my mom died. So that's the long story to how I essentially changed what I was doing with my life and what I thought the trajectory of my career was. And I dove headfirst into healthcare. And I ended up working for one of the company that discovered the BRCA mutations, thinking that's actually where the problem lies. That's what happened with my mom. Had she known that she had this mutation, she could have done things differently. And it was actually while I was working at that company that I realized, yes, that is an important component. But when I was thinking of what is the root of the problem here, why do I feel like I'm still not solving this problem, even though I'm working at this company that's on the forefront of educating about genetic testing? It was because at the end of the day, the problem was that women didn't know their risks, neither did their doctors. And so women weren't getting the right care at the right time. And that's really when Gabbi was born, named after my mom, Lisa Gabrielle. And our whole mission is to eradicate late-stage breast cancer to ensure every woman knows her risk and has access to early detection. So the way we do that is, I don't know, do you want me to go into that right now?
Yeah, go for it. You're already on a great roll.
Okay. So the way we ensure essentially what happened to my mom doesn't happen to other women all starts with first a risk assessment. Your risk dictates what you need, when, how often, what type. And so we created a proprietary risk assessment that's consumer facing, takes less than 2 minutes for a woman to complete. You can do it on your phone. At the end of it, you learn what your future risk of breast cancer is. Knowing your risk is step one and critical. However, if you don't know what to do with that information, it's moot. It doesn't matter. So now that you know your risk, you can schedule via telehealth to meet with one of our breast specialists who are available the next day. And what they're going to do is design a care plan now based off of your risk. They would have said to my mom, hey, you're at a high risk of breast cancer. A mammogram's not the right screening for you. We're going to start your screening at 25, order genetic testing, and you need to get annual breast MRIs. And so we design that care plan, and then we can actually order that care. So you don't have to go back to your OBGYN or primary care. We're able to order that for you and get you to that imaging or testing in 14 days or less.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. So many questions on that. I guess really starting out too with dense breasts. I've heard this from other friends that I have as well, this being a pain point because when they try to go in and want to get tested, they want those tests for MRIs instead of just a mammogram. And the doctors say, no, you don't need to. There's still that old way of thinking. From your experiences and the doctors that you work with on Gabbi, what is considered dense breast versus not? What's that line?
Sure. So I think the line, there are different gradients. There are multiple different gradients. And so I'd say, to not go too clinically, think about breast density as if you have dense breasts, it's like being a polar bear in the middle of a whiteout snowstorm. And by the way, that is not my analogy. I'm stealing that from Dr. Rachel Brem, who's an incredible world-renowned breast radiologist. But so to say that again, a white polar bear in the middle of a whiteout snowstorm, you can't tell the difference. And that's what dense breast tissue does with cancer, that essentially everything looks the same. You can't distinguish between abnormal and normal. And so that's why you need heightened or more specific imaging in order to be able to see in a whiteout, see the polar bear in the whiteout. Whereas a woman who doesn't have dense breast tissue, let's just say it's like a brown bear in a whiteout. You're going to be able to see the brown bear.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious too, especially given your experience going through it and thankfully coming out on the other side of it. And what's something that every woman should know about breast cancer, but most aren't being told?
Yeah, I think I'd say, a couple things. I mean, the first is that dense breast tissue is really common. I mean, about 50% of women have dense breast tissue, and it's even more common in women of color. So I think the first thing is that you need to learn what your breast density is because it matters. It impacts the type of screening you're going to have. But maybe even before we talk about what women should know about breast cancer and their breasts, it's that everything starts with risk. Because if you're high risk, I'm going to give the most extreme example, which actually was me and was my mom. If as a high risk woman, I should have started getting imaging at 25 years old. And it shouldn't have been a mammogram. I should have had genetic testing. And I'm getting imaging every year, starting at 30. And so the reason knowing your risk matters is because it truly impacts when you start screening. It may not be at 40 like average women are told. And it may not be a mammogram. It could be a breast MRI. It could be an ultrasound. And you may have to do it more than annually. And so I think maybe to tie that all together, what women need to know about breast cancer is one, you need to know your risk because it determines how we are going to find breast cancer if it's there and what you should start doing and when. And then the second thing I would say is that breast cancer, if caught early, is 99% survivable. And so really, I really believe that we've been working on finding a cure for cancer for so long and we've not really made a ton of progress over hundreds of years. But what we have made progress on is catching breast cancer early. We can do it. The problem is that women need to be getting screening That's how we find breast cancer in order to catch it early. And so if women realize that the screening is actually what allows us to find it early, that guarantees that you're going to live.
Yeah. As you think about that, is it a mix of the standard of care not being updated, or is it also from a just consumer patient lack of understanding or education around what they should be doing?
I think it's all of it. I mean, I think the first one is that in the United States, we want to treat once something is diagnosed. We want to start dealing with it once it's already there, as opposed to prevention or early detection. And so I think there's a holistic problem in American healthcare that therefore prescribes a generalized guidance for example, all women, that you should start getting mammograms at 40, which is absolutely the right thing if you're average risk. But if you are not average risk, it may not be the right thing. So I think that's problem number one, is just there needs to be a personalization of the type of care screening based off of your risk level. And then I think the second is definitely an education awareness gap. What we've done a really good job in the United States is awareness about breast cancer. However, it hasn't really evolved much over the years. I mean, even before my mom got breast cancer, it was our grandmothers that got breast cancer. And when my mom was diagnosed, I was 22. I didn't know really any other friends at my age whose moms were getting breast cancer in their 40s or 50s. It was happening usually like post 60. And so what I think hasn't evolved is a realization about early detection, and that if it's caught early, it's life-saving. The fact that breast cancer incidence is increasing for younger women, as in women under 40, and it can happen to you under 40. And we're starting to see that with lots of celebrities, in fact, who are coming out and being very public with their diagnosis. So anyways, that's a long way of saying I think it's both.
Interesting. That was something I found shocking, is that the increased rate of younger people getting breast cancer. And I don't know if they know the reason behind it, but it's even just another testament to why we all need to know more about our breasts and make sure that we know our risk factors, because that has been increasing.
Yeah, and I think that's a good segue into different risk factors. There are definitely hypotheses around why we're seeing the incidence increase in women under 40. And there are definitely some general consensus around what those are. And a lot of those things are factors that we are taking into account when we are assessing a woman's risk of breast cancer. And so you've already talked about a major one. Your breast tissue, the density, is a factor because it makes it harder to find. But things like menstruation and reproductive factors, like how old you were when you first had your period, actually could increase or decrease your risk of breast cancer.
Which one is, if it's earlier, is it increasing, or?
Earlier increases your risk. And if you've given birth, and how young you gave birth, the younger, basically giving birth decreases your risk, and the younger you gave birth decreases your risk. If you breastfed, yeah.
Wow. It's like going the opposite direction of like,
I know.
seeing people have kids later. Back in the day when like my mom was having us, she was
totally
her late 20s.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's interesting to think about as a factor. Nutrition and diet are factors, as well as exercise, and those has to do with fat production in the body. And then, of course, family history are also factors. And I think a lot of people think that the main risk factor for breast cancer is family history, and that's just not true. It is a factor, but it is not the only one, and it is not the greatest weighted one either.
Wow. No, that's super helpful and interesting to know on multiple factors. It's a lot more than even I knew. And I knew of some, but even beyond what you think it actually is impacting it. I'm curious too, as you mentioned, some of it is with family history, but it's also these other components. And yet a lot of times it's not being discussed with providers today when you're going either through a primary care doc or your OBGYN.
Yeah. So when we think about all doctors or clinicians, they go to training. Doctors go to med school. And I believe the statistics, because I looked it up recently, only 35% of primary care and actually it's 35% of OBGYNs, and it's even less for primary care doctors, get formal training in med school on family history and cancer genetics and cancer risk. So when you think about that, of course, they're not prompting that conversation when you go to see them for an annual because they actually really haven't been trained on it.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't realize it was that low then.
Yep. Of course they're collecting in that patient paperwork that you referenced. There's a blatant question. Has anyone in your family ever had cancer? I mean, I've seen some terrible forms. That is literally the question. They don't even prompt you what type of cancer, age of diagnosis, what family member, what side of the family. But those things all matter. And then what's done with that information? I mean, unless you probably listed 3 or more family members on the same side of the family who had cancer, they're probably not going to have a conversation with you about it. And so I always call that Las Vegas red lights. Unless your family history is going, blah, your primary care OBGYN is not going to do anything about it. And that's not their fault. They haven't been trained on it. Most primary care and OBGYNs.
I'm curious too, with this earlier focus on prevention, especially for women and being more aware. Their self-breast exams have been something in the past a lot of people had been advocating. Is that still considered empowering and something that could be helpful, or is it more of an outdated advice?
I would say absolutely. So this is a great stat. 80% of breast cancer is first found by the woman and then confirmed by her doctor. And what that literally means is a woman felt a lump. And lumps in our breasts come and go with our period. So it's totally normal. But the only way you know if you have a lump and if it is different from the types of lumps that come and go is if you know you're normal. And the only way you can know you're normal is if you're touching yourself. And the best way to do that is by performing a self-breast exam. And so really it's practicing that breast self-awareness, which we think the best way to do that is by performing a self-breast exam. And it's really the first line of defense. You are the first line of defense to finding breast cancer.
Yeah, and it's wild to me too. Like, so I've been on hormonal birth control for a while. And so you get used to taking the pill and doing it. And I am shocked to say this, but I literally didn't know at the end of the month where it says self-breast exam as a recommendation. It was like on it. And I was like, oh my God, I've been taking this for so many years. And I didn't even notice that until I started getting older. You start seeing more people who get breast cancer. And I'm like, oh, I haven't even been doing that. And so it's wild. There are things there, but it's so tiny that
in all fairness, I take the oral birth control pill. And I mean, I don't know if mine has it on there, but I've never seen it. So I haven't.
Well, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
But yeah, so going off of that, I'm curious. I know we talked a little bit about Gabbi already and the platform, but how does it fit into the existing healthcare workflow, especially with existing providers that you see and also with payers?
Yeah. So we kind of talked about this in terms of OBGYNs and primary care docs is 35% of them are actually getting trained on breast cancer risk assessment, family history, and genetics in med school. So I think the one thing is how we're different is we're breast specialists who are trained specifically in breast health and breast cancer. That's all we do. And so we ask questions and provide care and recommendations in a way that's different from an OBGYN or primary care because we have that expertise. So how do we fit into the existing care workflow? Let's just go from the patient perspective. Just like if you go into your primary care and you're like, hey, I'd like to start thinking about getting pregnant, they're going to refer you to an OBGYN. Because those are the doctors that are best at delivering babies. You go into your OBGYN and you're having some GI issues. They're going to refer you to a gastroenterologist because they're the doctors that handle GI. It's the same thing with your breast health. So think about us as part of your care team. We're not replacing your OBGYN or your primary care, but we are the experts to take care of your breast health in conjunction with your existing medical provider. Now, on the business side, the providers see us as the expert they can refer their patients to feel confident that their patient is getting the best care as it relates to their breast health. So we work together with the provider to make sure that we're covering this specific bucket, if you will. And so in the health system workflow, you go into your primary care or OBGYN and they refer you to Gabbi to have your risk assessed, design a care plan, and then to order that care for you. And we're documenting all of that in your EHR. And so that is shared back with the referring provider so that they have visibility into all of that and there's continuity of care.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense and really a great model for it too, because if you can, fit into that existing workflow seamlessly, It just makes the experience better for everyone and gets better outcomes. The other thing you mentioned too is that for patients filling out the risk assessment, what really powers that risk model in terms of the data, and how is it different from traditional tools?
Yeah, so there are multiple quote unquote standard of care risk models out there today. And those are the foundation of our proprietary risk model. And really what ours does is build on those and fills in the gaps. So the most common standard of care risk model is the Tyrer-Cuzick, and this was developed decades ago. Two of its major pitfalls are that it can really only accurately predict risk for women over 35 who are Caucasian. And so one of our first goals was to be able to build a model with enough access to data that we could predict risk for all ages and all ethnicities. And so that was the first gap that we wanted to fill. In addition, using the Tyrer-Cuzick again as an example, it only takes into account maternal family history. But your DNA is 50% from mom and 50% from dad. So if we're not taking in the paternal side of the family, we're missing half the equation.
That seems so obvious, but wow, yeah, that's incredible and that's great. I know getting a wider representation of women and data around that is so critical. It's something I've been just shocked as I've gone deeper down the rabbit hole of women's health and how there isn't a lot of data there, and that data is so powerful to actually make precision care and treatment plans. And so that's great that you guys are taking a more well-rounded, comprehensive approach to it. And with the patients that you have on your platform today, what are some of the success stories for women that have been using it?
Yeah, this is the best part of the job. So I can tell you about two patients, very different stages of life, very different ages. I'll start with Christy. Christy's 31. She works for a global tech company. She's an Asian American. Her maternal grandmother had breast cancer and her mom had breast cancer. None of them were particularly young, but that is two family members on the same side of the family. And she had actually brought up to her primary care provider multiple times, hey, I'm pretty concerned about my own breast health because I saw my grandma die of breast cancer and then my mom had it too. And ultimately she was dismissed by her primary care. I think these were conversations she was having in her 20s. And they're like, don't worry about it. You're too young. It's not a big deal. You don't have to think about it till you're 40. So that's why in this scenario, Gabbi was offered to her as a benefit as part of her health plan through the global tech company that employed her. She jumped to learn her risk. So she completed her risk assessment. In fact, she was flagged as high risk. And so she scheduled a telehealth appointment with one of our breast specialists who immediately was like, you know what, we're going to do genetic testing because of this family component. Within less than a week, her genetic test came back positive. She has a genetic mutation that no one had thought to test her for at that point, and it really impacts her care. So at 31, she was actually already a year behind on breast imaging based off of now being high risk related to this mutation. So we were then able to order her first imaging and create that plan that said, okay, so we're behind on this imaging, so we need to go get this tomorrow. And then this is what that plan's going to look like going forward. And now she's 31 years old and is feeling in control of her health because she knows what she needs to do. And she also is now having consults with fertility specialists because she has this genetic component and she's thinking about getting pregnant. So these were all important things that she needed to find out in order to take control of her health. So that's Christy. And then another one, that a recent patient case study that I love that's particularly unique is Amelia, who's 57, one of the older patients that we see. Typically, we're seeing under 50, but Amelia's 57. She also learned about Gabbi through her health plan, through her husband. So she's dependent on her husband's health plan. Amelia actually works in health tech, specifically medical diagnostic testing, and which is particularly fascinating, and has worked in that industry for over 15 years. And what she shared with us was that she knows so much about this space that was actually the barrier for her ever getting testing or having a risk assessed, because she knew how difficult it was to navigate getting testing, getting imaging, getting it scheduled, getting it approved, getting insurance to cover it. And so that is what kept her for decades not wanting to learn her risk, even though she worked in the industry and knew that she absolutely probably was high risk. So we flagged her as high risk as well. We also ordered genetic testing. She had brought this up with her primary care doctor before. She had attempted to have the conversation. And when she could tell they didn't know what they were talking about, she's like, okay, I'm not going forward with this with you. So she completed the risk assessment, was flagged as high risk, met with a Gabbi breast specialist. And within the first 5 minutes, I felt more confidence from the specialist than I did from the primary care doctor who I'd been seeing for over a decade. And the fact that they brought up genetic testing and knew what they were talking about, I knew I was in the right place. So she also came back with a genetic mutation that not only increases her risk of breast cancer significantly, but increases her risk of colon cancer and pancreatic cancer. And so we were immediately ordering a breast MRI, a colonoscopy, and a pancreatic screening, things that she never would have gotten because of that. And add on top of that, all of that was able to happen in a matter of 4 weeks. And to her point, she was like, it was amazing that Gabbi was able to basically do the heavy lifting, create the plan, but then help me get all of these appointments, tell me what to do, where to go, so that she didn't have to do it. Because a lot of, I think, the problem in healthcare that stops us from doing things is the inevitable drudge that is going to happen because you're going to wait on hold or you're going to have to get approval,
It makes it such a pain to go through. And even for doctors that you find and you want to see them, you have to almost book it out. It's kind of like a wedding. You have to book it out a year in advance.
You have to reserve your venue.
You do, and reserve your time to come in. And oftentimes things happen way in advance of that. And so you need to be able to have access to that care. But it's interesting too, because when I was at Cigna on the ventures side, I did a lot in looking into cancer market and also women's health. And the overlap there, breast cancer was a big one. And I think for most insurance companies, not surprisingly, it's high on their member population. But I realized too, to your point of the whole process of going through, the first initial mammogram is typically covered. But if you get an abnormal test, then it's on you and you have to pay for additional tests. And then it doesn't factor in the SDOH that goes into it. I completely agree with you. As you were saying that, like even just your basic normal checkups, it's tough.
Totally. I mean, you know this. I moved to New York recently and trying to get reestablished with a new primary care doctor in New York. I'm calling and I thought I was being proactive before I moved there. I'm going to be there in October and my annual technically is due in October. So I'm calling end of August, beginning of September. And I called 5 different offices. Wait times ranged from 6 months to 13 months. And I was like, I'm sorry. You want me to wait how long for my annual exam that is due in a month? So, I mean, just even something like that.
That's wild. We need solutions like what you're building as well, where there's that virtual component that can help provide that support because providers are busier than ever. And I don't blame them either because the way that the healthcare system's set up from a reimbursement standpoint, it's not great for them either. So we need a system where we can make it better for everyone on either side.
I totally agree.
And I'm curious too, because as a patient and a founder, where do you think the healthcare system fails women the most?
Oh, man. I mean, from the beginning, from the fact that women weren't included in research until 1993, all the way to the fact that 35% of OBGYNs are trained on genetics, family history, and risk assessment. I mean, it's just, it's everything in between.
Yeah, that is completely fair. The fact with those 2 examples you said with the patients and them, not even just one time, but multiple times being like, this is a concern. Is there a way to do this? There should be more ways to help and support in that way.
It's the number one thing we hear from our patients is I had brought it up with my PCP multiple times. I brought it up with my OBGYN. They wouldn't listen to me or they said I was fine or they didn't, whatever. And my actually favorite example that is not breast cancer related is, I don't know if you saw, this was a month or 2 ago, a medical journal comes out saying essentially OBGYNs should no longer dismiss when a female patient reports their IUD insertion is painful. Really? We needed a medical journal to tell us that? But that's just a classic example of women aren't being listened to.
No, and the amount of people I know who have IUDs that are just painful. And the fact that I learned too that when you go into an OBGYN office, they actually have local anesthesia or things like that that you can do, but no one brings it up.
It doesn't get reimbursed. That's why.
I mean, I'd pay for it.
Yeah, right. Also, yeah.
It's just wild that kind of stuff. Ask any woman anything related to their health, and they will have that story. How much
Totally.
hit it over the head. I love the ones where it's the simulation of cramps to men, and you put it
Oh,
on
I
them.
love that too. Watching that, I made my partner watch it too. And I was like,
Right.
and if we ever get our hands on one of these machines, you better believe.
But it's almost to the point where we just need to make men go through all this and just to empathize. But I know there's great men who get it, but it's just in a general scheme, it's just wild. That's what you have to do.
Totally. I would also just add, though, it's the female doctors too.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Who are dismissing.
Yes, I've had that too from my experience with OBGYNs. My last one is amazing. Love her. But I've had some ones in the past that did not believe me, and it was a lot more pain and trauma I could have avoided. Yeah, I completely am with you on that. I'm curious too, from working with employer coverage, what has that been in terms of that discussion of what gets covered and reimbursed from your conversations versus maybe what hadn't been in the past? Because I know genetic testing, when it first came out, it was very expensive, not covered a lot.
Yeah. So, I mean, specifically as it relates to genetic testing, you're absolutely right. When genetic testing first came out, no payer covered it, and it was $4,500 out of pocket. When I worked for the genetic testing company, it had come down to maybe $3,000 out of pocket. However, almost all major insurances then would cover it if you met specific criteria. And that was probably, at that point, that was about 20 years post genetic testing come out. So it started with no payer coverage and only $4,500 out of pocket. And then 20 years later, it's about $3,000 out of pocket, but there is major payer coverage if you meet all this specific criteria. To then now today, the cost, regardless of if you meet criteria, if you want to pay out of pocket, is $250.
Wow.
So it's significantly dropped. And I mean, this is, now we're at 25, like 30 years post genetic testing coming out. It's now way more approachable at $250 cash pay. And every major payer covers genetic testing. But again, only if you meet specific criteria. So from the genetic testing world, that's kind of what's going on. In terms of breast cancer, let's use screening, for example. The example I like to give is, well, first, if you have a high deductible plan, regardless, it's going to cost you money to do anything. So let's just kind of like put that aside as something separate. But the example I often like to give, and this is why it's important to see a specialist, if you, Maddie, were to go into your OBGYN, and let's say you read the New York Times article that talked about how 50% of women have dense breast tissue and that mammograms don't work if you have dense breast tissue, and you've never had a mammogram, but you also just want to get a breast MRI because I read this New York Times article. How do I have dense breast tissue? I don't know. I want a breast MRI. Let's give your OBGYN the benefit of the doubt. And she'll say, okay, I'll order it for you, but it's likely not going to be covered by insurance. How she's coding that to the payer is, Maddie, an average risk woman wants a breast MRI. That will be denied every time. However, Maddie comes to Gabbi, learns that she has a high risk of breast cancer, and the Gabbi breast specialist is now going, Maddie, a high risk woman needs a breast MRI, and we've never been denied. And so there is a component of how you code, and why I harp on this and always go back to it. It's why risk is the most important thing to figure out, because it unlocks this world of options, possibilities, and insurance coverage if you have documented your risk level. And then finally, I will say, I sit on the leadership team of the Breast Cancer Early Detection Coalition, and we helped introduce the Find It Early Act that basically is mandating all federal and commercial payers to cover any ancillary services such as breast MRIs or ultrasounds for any woman who has dense breast tissue or documented high risk. And many states have already adopted that and put that into policy. We're trying to get like all 50 states, but so I would just add that in addition.
That's incredible. I'm so glad that there's being advancements and movement in that way. That's awesome. And hopefully we get to 50 very soon. So I want to wrap up with my favorite section, myth busting, taboos, and unfiltered real talk. So first one I have is, what is the biggest myth about breast cancer risk?
We kind of talked about this already, as silly as it is. breast cancer can only come from your mom or your mom's side of the family. I would say that's one. Another, I think, is that breast cancer doesn't happen in younger women. Also a myth. I think that family history is the only thing that determines your risk.
That all makes a ton of sense. The next question I have, definitely one where I felt this, and so curious your thoughts on it. A lot of women may be thinking, I'm afraid to get screened because what if they do find something? And there's a lot of fear-based avoidance on going and actually getting your breast checked and seeing if you do have risk.
I had the immense privilege of working alongside for a period of time someone who's become a dear friend, who's also a medical advisor at Gabbi, but who's a renowned double board certified OBGYN and geneticist. He was on Angelina Jolie's care team, and that's Dr. Rick Frieder. And I got to see patients in clinic with him. And one of the most moving experiences was him having the conversation with a young woman who he's essentially saying, I'd like to order genetic testing for you because of what I'm looking at here in your family is concerning. And so I'd like to rule it out. And she basically is saying, no, I'm really scared. I don't want to find out. And he, first of all, has the most incredible bedside manner ever. And he leans forward and basically says, the risk you have right now is the exact same risk you have once you get the result of a genetic test. The difference is by getting that genetic testing result, now you're in the driver's seat and you can do something about it. And so I think the power of knowing your risk, and that was talking about a genetic test, but even if we're just talking about a risk assessment, the power of knowing your risk is that you're essentially driving blindly right now by not knowing your risk. And there could be things you could do about it. But instead, by not learning it, you're not able to take control. It's like I said, once you know your risk, it opens up this entire door of possibilities, not only of things and actions that you can take, but of insurance coverage. And by not learning your risk, it is really actually putting you in the passenger seat of your risk taking you on the wild ride of life that potentially could lead to cancer, as opposed to being able to be the driver that chooses, I'm going to turn right or I'm going to turn left.
That's such a great example of how to think about it, taking that fear and turning it into control and power and putting it back into you to be able to know you have options, and that the earlier you figure that out, the more options you'll have. And as you said, because even with breast cancer, if you get it found early, you have so much more options and likelihood of beating it and becoming cancer free than if you discover it way too late.
Yeah, I mean, imagine hearing, and I've gotten to hear from our patients who say this, that you get diagnosed with breast cancer at an early stage and you go in the first time to meet with your oncologist and they tell you, do you realize how lucky you are? You have the best kind of breast cancer. I know exactly what to do, and it is going to be gone in X amount of time, and you're never going to have to worry about it again. That's not how we think about cancer, but imagine being the patient who gets to hear that as opposed to going in and being like, I'm going to die, I'm going to lose my hair, I'm going to have to chop off my breast. I mean,
yeah, it's a big difference in the short-term fear and getting over that.
yeah.
To have
I mean,
that
and if we think about sorry to interrupt. If we think about
No.
another maybe myth about breast cancer, it is a traumatic disease that will kill you, will make you lose your hair, will make you lose weight, will make you everything taste like metal. You'll have no energy. I mean, the list goes on about how horrible it is to have a late stage breast cancer. We don't really talk about what it's like to have an early stage breast cancer and how, and I don't mean to say that like early stage breast cancer is easy. Of course, it's not, but comparatively, it's a walk in the park.
I think it's a good point you bring up, because I think with a lot of people, that's a lot of what you hear too, or unfortunately, a lot of women get it later. And so that's all you see. And it's
Yeah,
really,
totally.
I can't even imagine the toll it takes on you. And that fear just keeps growing and growing. But if you had to choose one of those options,
Right.
absolutely choosing the one where it's earlier stage, and then you can short term get through that's going to be still hard, but then you have the rest of your life to live.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm a great example of that, actually. I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 24. And because it was early, I didn't have to have radiation. I didn't have to have chemotherapy. At 24, I was not losing my hair. I had a double mastectomy, which was my choice. I could have just had a lumpectomy, but I had a double mastectomy. And I go for a regular checkup and get clinical breast exams annually, but I don't really have to worry about it.
Oh, that's incredible, man. So I've got one last question
Okay.
before wrapping up. Who else is doing amazing work in women's health that should be heard?
Oh my gosh. I love this question. And I want to list like 100 people.
You can list
So
many. That has
let me
happened
just
in other ones too. So
preface that I can't list 100, but I'll list many. So a company I deeply believe in and love is On Flow. They're providing period products for women in the bathrooms that are free. Another company, Frame Fertility, is doing think like Gabbi, but for fertility. So like predicting your risk before trying to get pregnant so you can plan for it. Electra, menopause, MIDI, menopause, Evie, vaginal microbiome, Hey Jane, abortion care. I mean, there's so many incredible women doing incredible things that, and in women's health specifically, it's a very inspiring and exciting part of healthcare to be involved in.
yeah, those are incredible women and definitely on my list to get on the podcast. My goal is to get as many, if not all, being, the ambitious side of me for this podcast. But yeah, I love those ones that you recommended. And thanks so much for being on the podcast. It was wonderful having you on. And before signing off, where can people find or learn more about Gabbi?
Yes. So you can go to our website, Gabbi.com, Gabbi. We're also active on LinkedIn and slightly active on Instagram, but you can definitely go to our website. It's the best way to find us.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much again and really loved having you on.
You bet. This was super fun, Maddie. Thank you.
Bye. That's a wrap on this week's episode of Let's Be Heard. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned the importance of knowing your breast health and why knowing your risks early for breast cancer can be life-saving. Big thanks to Kaitlin Christine for getting real and opening up about her experience as a breast cancer survivor and how that led to her journey starting Gabbi. Want to learn more about Gabbi? Check out the links in the show notes. If you can't get enough of LBH, hit subscribe and follow our podcast on Instagram. See you next time, LBH crew.